So, have you ever woken up from a dream that felt um, less like a random jumble of chaotic images and more like, I don't know, a high-budget psychological thriller?
Oh, like one that your brain specifically designed just to send you a terrifying message?
Exactly. I mean, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision, right? It's like engineering.
Right, yeah, like a broken bone.
Yeah, you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the bone. The doctor just points at it and says, there it is. There's the problem.
It is entirely binary. I mean, the bone is broken or the bone is intact.
Yeah.
The blood test is positive or it is negative. And, we are deeply comforted by that level of visibility and categorization. We
Yes.
really like our problems to be things we can, well, just point a laser pointer at.
We really do. But then you step into the world of neurodevelopment or trauma or uh, deep-seated psychological architecture, and suddenly that pristine X-ray machine is completely broken.
Completely, the lens is totally shattered.
Yeah, and we are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is honestly, it's incredibly murky,
Mm.
especially when symptoms aren't manifesting as a fever or a cough,
Yeah.
but purely in the subconscious.
In the dreams.
Right, in the incredibly bizarre narratives that unfold in our minds when we close our eyes at night.
Which is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. But what we often fail to realize is that those muddy waters frequently hold the most profound truths about our baseline psychological state.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if you know how to filter the mud, if you know how to read the peculiar language of the subconscious, you find that dreams are not just random neurological misfires.
They're actually doing something on purpose.
Oh, absolutely. They are highly structured, deeply intentional diagnostics in their own right.
Which is exactly why I was so obsessed with the source material we are diving into today. I mean, we have our hands on an incredibly detailed, multi-layered account of a very specific real-world dream.
And it is a fascinating one to unpack.
It really is. But it's not just the narrative of the dream itself, right?
Yeah.
We have a rigorous, clinical, Jungian, and psychoanalytic breakdown of this entire nighttime sequence.
Which turns it from just a spooky story into real science.
Exactly. This isn't just a fun exercise in interpreting a nightmare. It is a masterclass in understanding how the human mind utilizes bizarre, sometimes ridiculous symbols to process severe trauma.
And to navigate authority and, to handle the agonizingly painful journey of just growing up.
Right. And as we walk through this deep dive, we're going to use this dream as a mirror for you, the listener.
Because while the specific imagery of this dream, like, the exact monsters, the exact settings, they're entirely unique to the individual who dreamt it. But the mechanisms at play,
The universal.
they're universally human. The way this dreamer's mind attempts to protect itself, the way it hides its own pain, and the way it struggles for true independence.
Yeah.
Those are the exact same mechanisms your mind uses every single day, whether you are awake or asleep.
So I want to set the scene for you right away. Just, imagine you are standing in your father's old office.
Okay, I'll picture.
It's early in the morning, the light is just coming in, and you are building a video game with your closest friends. But out of nowhere, the game turns completely terrifying.
Just 0 to 60.
Right. A helicopter appears out of the sky. Masked thieves rappel down into the office. And from there, the environment just shifts into this relentless nightmare of underground monsters, impossible riddles, and bizarre physical transformations.
It's a lot for the brain to handle.
It is. As someone who loves a good cinematic experience, I am just marveling at the fact that the human brain can direct, write, score, and star in a psychological blockbuster of this magnitude.
All while we're just lying in bed, completely paralyzed in REM sleep, drooling on a pillow.
Exactly, drooling away while our brain wins an Oscar.
It is a staggering feat of cognitive processing. What your brain is actually doing during REM sleep is essentially taking the emotional data of your waking life and running it through a highly complex associative simulator.
Wow. A simulator.
Yeah. And the goal of our discussion today is to walk you through this specific simulation phase by phase to show you the architecture of the mind.
So by the end of this, the hope is that you will start looking at your own bizarre dreams, not as, random noise to be ignored over morning coffee, but as urgent, coded messages from your own psyche.
Precisely. Let's get right into the foundational architecture of this dream, because the setting is doing a lot of heavy lifting here.
Yeah, the dream starts in the father's office. And the dreamer isn't just hanging out, right? They are actively building a video game.
But they are using this totally bizarre mechanic to build it.
Right. To construct the levels of the game, the dreamer has to step on these physical floor buttons that cause their own avatar and perspective to tumble wildly in, out, up, and down the building.
Just constantly losing their footing.
Yeah, I'm reading this and thinking, this is a phenomenally precarious way to build anything. You're trying to create a structure, but the very act of building it throws your entire equilibrium off.
The spatial metaphors here are incredibly rich. In classic psychoanalysis, the father's office is not just a room with a desk.
What is it then?
It represents the overarching social order, the established moral rules, and patriarchal authority. It is the realm of the dominant parent, the superego in Freudian terms. The space itself dictates the rules of reality.
So the dreamer is attempting to create something entirely of their own, a video game, which inherently has its own rules and logic that the creator dictates.
Right, they are trying to establish autonomy.
But they're trying to do it inside the established domain of their father. They're trying to be independent, but they are literally operating on their dad's turf. That feels like an inherent contradiction.
It is an inherent contradiction,
Yeah.
and it is the root of the psychological instability we see in the dream.
Okay, that makes sense.
Look at the tumbling mechanic you mentioned, stepping on buttons that throw you in, out, up, and down. This reflects the dreamer's incredibly unstable psychological foundation.
Because they're on someone else's turf.
Exactly. They are attempting to build their own life, to achieve this desperately desired autonomy, but every single step they take forward feels perilous.
It's like an unconscious acknowledgement that their current path to independence involves a constant, terrifying risk of falling.
Where?
Or, losing their balance, or facing a sudden drop in social standing.
It makes me think of trying to build a career or a relationship or just a life on a giant bouncy castle.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
You know what you want to build, you have the bricks, you are trying to stack them and move forward, but because the foundation itself is entirely reactive and unstable, every single step you take threatens to throw you completely off balance.
You are exerting massive amounts of energy just to remain upright, let alone build something that is actually going to last.
That bouncy castle analogy captures the physical sensation of the anxiety perfectly. You are exhausting yourself just managing the environment. Now, within this unstable environment, the dreamer is not alone. They have company. And as soon as the dreamer manages to build a small part of the game and announces, we've made a simple game, the dream immediately turns hostile.
Yeah, that helicopter suddenly appears, and 4 masked thieves violently rappel down into the office.
And this is where we have to talk about the dreamer's friends, because their reaction is fascinating.
Yeah, the clinical text notes that these friends are 4 highly idealized, extremely handsome, blonde teenagers. They are the absolute epitome of cool.
They're the guys everyone wants to be.
Right, but the second these masked thieves attack the office, these incredibly cool friends completely fall apart.
And just lose it.
They panic. They just run around in circles yelling, this is bad, this is bad. They become utterly, entirely useless.
Leaving the dreamer totally alone to fight off these invaders with its literal 3-meter wooden beam.
Right, which is just wild. To understand why the friends react this way, we have to pull back and look at the Jungian concept of the persona.
Right? Exactly. The persona, derived from the Latin word for a theatrical mask, is the social face we all construct and wear.
It is the highly polished, idealized version of ourselves that we present to the external world. To gain acceptance, to fit in, and to navigate social hierarchies.
Yes, and those 4 flawless, handsome friends in the dream, they don't represent actual people from the dreamer's waking life.
Wait, they don't?
No, they represent the dreamer's own persona. They are shiny, socially acceptable, and aesthetically perfect.
But they are completely hollow when actual visceral danger arrives.
Yeah.
I find it so compelling that our brain will construct these perfect avatars of who we desperately want to be, these cool, unflappable versions of ourselves,
Right.
only to immediately throw them into a crisis, just to show us how utterly useless that fake perfection is when a real crisis hits. It's like the brain is mocking its own coping mechanism.
It is a brutal, unsparing self-critique generated by the subconscious. I mean, the persona is fantastic for cocktail parties.
Oh, sure. Networking events, polite society.
Yeah, but it is completely useless for psychological warfare. The masked thieves that repel in represent the sudden, violent invasion of raw, unpolished, unconscious threats.
Like what kind of threats?
They are repressed aggression, real-world existential anxieties, and chaotic, unstructured forces.
I want to push back on that slightly, or at least clarify it. Are masked thieves in a dream always indicative of deep, repressed trauma? Or could it just be like the brain processing the fact that the dreamer had a stressful day at work?
That is a very fair distinction to make.
How do we differentiate between daily stress and an unconscious invasion?
The key is in the disruption of the established order. If the dream was just processing daily stress, the dreamer might simply be frustrated trying to build the game, or maybe the friends might be annoying.
Right.
But helicopter and masked thieves represent a militaristic, violent breach of a secure perimeter. The father's office is supposed to be the ultimate, safe, authoritative space.
Okay, I see.
The fact that it is breached so violently and from above suggests a force that completely overrides the dreamer's conscious control. When these messy, raw realities invade, the shiny social mask just shatters. The persona simply does not have the programming to handle raw emotion or trauma.
Which forces the dreamer to drop the facade, grab a massive plank of wood, and start swinging for their life.
And they actually manage to fight back.
Yeah, they push the masked thieves off a balcony one by one. But as the enemies fall over the edge, the environment doesn't just return to normal. The entire setting shifts dramatically.
It gets much worse.
We aren't in the brightly lit, elevated office anymore. The space moves sharply, terrifyingly downward. The dreamer is leaving the conscious social world of the office and being pulled into something much older and darker.
And the spatial geography of dreams is rarely arbitrary. That physical descent moving downward, away from the light, away from the elevated structures of society, is the classic spatial metaphor for diving into the personal unconscious.
So they're going into the basement of their mind, basically.
Exactly. The dreamer has survived the initial surface-level anxiety attack, but in doing so, they have ruptured the floorboards of their own mind. They are entering the shadow realm.
The office wall literally dissolves into a massive, incredibly wide staircase that leads down into absolute, impenetrable darkness. And from that darkness, the dreamer hears these beastly, echoing screams.
Pure horror movie aesthetics.
Literally.
Yeah.
The dreamer, obviously terrified, tries to get those useless, handsome friends to just throw iron bars down the stairs to block whatever's coming up, but the friends
Your
refuse.
persona is completely paralyzed.
So the dreamer is forced to stand at the top of the stairs and fight alone. One of the enemies makes it up the stairs, the dreamer pulls the mask off, and it's a junior from their high school club.
This unmasking is a pivotal moment of revelation in the clinical text.
It completely flips the dynamic.
Mhm.
You expect a demon or a monster, and it's just a younger kid from high school, and the junior just looks at the dreamer, smirks, and says, "Did you remember me? I'm the final boss of this game."
In Jungian terms, we have officially met the shadow.
Okay, explain the shadow for us.
If the persona is everything we want the world to see, the shadow is the psychological dumping ground for everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves.
So the bad stuff.
Right. It consists of our repressed desires, our darker impulses, our selfishness, and crucially, our intense competitiveness and jealousy.
But why specifically a junior from a high school club? Why not like a terrifying stranger?
Because a younger, familiar rival perfectly encapsulates a very specific type of waking life anxiety. It symbolizes the fear of being overtaken.
Oh, wow.
It's the deep-seated, often unspoken anxiety of losing your status, your relevance, or your position to someone younger, faster, or stronger.
The conscious mind might say, oh, I am happy for the younger generation.
Exactly. But the shadow harbors the bitter, terrified thought, they are going to replace me.
That fear of obsolescence. And the dream takes this figure and makes him physically terrifying in a very specific way. The dreamer notices that this junior's body is covered in stab wounds.
It's a gruesome image.
It is. But as the dreamer watches, these stab wounds magically heal themselves. The skin knits back together instantly, all except for one single wound.
Yes.
There is one old, jagged, unhealed wound located directly on the junior's sugetsu. And for those unfamiliar, the sugetsu refers to the solar plexus right in the pit of the stomach.
The junior points to this one open wound and asks the dreamer, "Did you forget?"
That single unhealed wound on the sugetsu is the absolute crux of this entire psychological sequence, isn't it?
It absolutely is. We have to look at this through the lens of Eastern medicine, martial arts, and modern psychosomatics.
Right.
The solar plexus is a highly significant anatomical and spiritual locus. Physically, it is a dense cluster of intersecting nerves just below the diaphragm, but psychologically and somatically, it is universally recognized as the center where the human body physically holds suppressed stress, severe anxiety, and unresolved emotional trauma.
I mean, we feel that instinctively. When you get a call with horrific news or you realize you've made a catastrophic mistake, you don't feel it in your elbow.
No, you don't.
You feel a sudden, hollow, agonizing drop in the absolute pit of your stomach.
Exactly. The body is keeping the score. So the wounds that are magically healing on the junior's body, those represent the daily frictions of life.
Like what?
You know, the traffic jams, the rude emails, the minor social rejections, the passing arguments. We sustain those microtraumas constantly, and our psyche is incredibly adept at healing them. We brush them off.
But that one wound on the solar plexus that refuses to close, that is the core unacknowledged trauma.
Yes. It's the one thing the brain cannot just knit back together with a good night's sleep.
The fact that the shadow explicitly points to it and taunts the dreamer with "did you forget"
Yeah.
is chilling. It's the subconscious screaming for the conscious mind to pay attention.
It's demanding it.
Because the conscious mind spends so much energy repressing the trauma, convincing itself, I have moved on, I am over that, it doesn't bother me anymore. And the subconscious is standing there pointing at a gaping wound saying, no, you aren't. I am still bleeding down here.
It is the mind's internal accounting system refusing to let a debt go unpaid.
The analogy that jumps into my head is the check engine light on a car dashboard.
Oh, that's good.
We have all been in that situation where the light pings on, and you just don't have the time or the money or the emotional bandwidth to deal with a mechanic. So what do?
You ignore it.
You take a piece of black electrical tape and you stick it right over the light. You can drive around, you can tell your friends your car runs perfectly, you can even convince yourself the car is fine because you don't see the light anymore.
But the engine is still fundamentally breaking down.
Right. The tape doesn't fix the pistons, it just blinds you to the warning.
And if you ignore the warning for long enough, the engine doesn't just stop quietly, it explodes, which is precisely the escalation we see immediately following the junior's taunt.
Because the dreamer has spent so long ignoring this foundational wound.
Yes, the shadow figure can no longer be contained in human form. The junior undergoes a horrific transformation. He violently morphs into a giant, wildly muscular lion.
With Dracula-like eyes, massive fangs, and he is wielding these spinning, flaming, three-blade weapons.
It's a huge escalation.
Okay, I have to stop you there.
Yeah.
Because I am reading the psychoanalytic breakdown in the source material, and when it gets to the spinning, flaming blades, the text immediately jumps to castration anxiety.
Yes. Classic Freud.
And I have to be honest, I struggle with this. We go from a kid with a stomach wound to a fantastical video game-style lion with flaming swords, and classic psychoanalysis immediately slaps a Freudian castration anxiety label on it.
I know, it sounds extreme.
It feels like a massive, outdated leap of logic. How do we rationally get from point A to point B without it just sounding like archaic clinical jargon?
I am glad you are pushing back on that, because the term castration anxiety often alienates people due to its hyper-literal orthodox Freudian roots.
Exactly.
In modern integrated psychoanalysis, we do not view this as a literal fear of anatomical castration. Instead, we have to look at what the concept represents structurally.
Okay, so decode the structure for me. What does a flaming, spinning blade actually mean to the brain?
Well, the lion is universally recognized as the king of beasts. In the context of a dream that started in the father's office, this lion represents an overwhelming, terrifying, ancient paternal power.
Like an ultimate authority figure.
Yes, it is an authoritative force that cannot be reasoned with. The spinning, flaming blades are instruments designed to sever, to maim, and to permanently disempower.
Yeah.
Therefore, castration anxiety in this context is the ultimate existential fear of being rendered entirely powerless. It is the fear of being violently stripped of your agency, your identity, and your ability to interact with the world as a whole, autonomous adult.
Wow, okay.
The dreamer is terrified that this unresolved trauma is going to permanently cripple their ability to function.
Okay, when you frame it as the total severing of personal agency,
Yeah.
it makes a lot more sense than the literal Freudian interpretation. And the dreamer's reaction confirms that total loss of agency.
They give up.
They don't try to fight the lion. The 3-meter wooden beam is useless now. The dreamer drops to their knees right there on the stairs and literally begs the lion for their life.
The conscious ego has completely surrendered. It is admitting total, unmitigated defeat in the face of these overwhelming unconscious forces.
The repressed fears have just gotten too big.
They have been ignored for so long that they have grown monstrous, rendering the dreamer's current coping mechanisms, like the persona, the wooden beam, the avoidance, entirely obsolete. They are staring down the barrel of total psychological annihilation.
I want to take a second here and just talk directly to you, the listener. because this is the mirror we promised at the beginning of the deep dive.
It's time to reflect.
I want you to genuinely ask yourself, what is your unhealed solar plexus wound? What is that old pain, that betrayal, that humiliation, or that catastrophic failure that you are constantly pretending you've forgotten?
We all have one.
You might have taped over the check engine light, but your subconscious might be down in the dark, building a flaming lion out of all that unacknowledged pain, just waiting for the moment your social mask slips.
It is a vital, terrifying question. Because the rule of the psyche is simple. If you do not face the shadow voluntarily, the mind will force you to face it involuntarily.
Oh.
And it will almost always choose the moment when you are least equipped to handle it.
But in the narrative of the dreamer actually doesn't get annihilated. Right at the absolute apex of the terror, when flaming blades are about to strike, an external force literally pulls the plug.
Just abruptly.
The game just stops. The terrifying lion instantly shrinks and reverts back into a normal, harmless guy.
And the dreamer's father emerges from a first-floor warehouse.
Just out of nowhere.
He casually brushes the dust off his hands and tells the dreamer, "I pressed the reset button. It's totally safe to restart the game now."
This is a massive tectonic shift in the dream's narrative. And to analyze it, we have to look closely at the spatial coordinates again. Where does the father emerge from? A warehouse on the first floor.
Right. In the architectural psychology of dreams, basements, lower levels, and warehouses are the storage units of the mind. They hold our earliest memories, deeply ingrained family dynamics, and the foundational, often unexamined beliefs we formed in childhood.
So the father isn't just walking out of a random room. He is stepping out from the foundational, archival architecture of the dreamer's own mind. He is emerging from the deep storage where the rules of childhood are kept.
That connects directly to why this scene is so insidious. On the surface narrative level, this looks like a classic rescue.
Right, the hero is about to die, the terrifying monster is gone, and the benevolent father saved the day.
But clinically, psychoanalytically, this intervention is a disaster. It is a forced regression. It is the dominant paternal figure stepping in and entirely cleanly removing the dreamer's autonomy.
I see what you mean. He didn't come in and hand the dreamer a bigger sword to defeat the lion.
No.
He didn't teach the dreamer a new skill. He just bypassed the dreamer entirely and unplugged the console. He invalidated the entire struggle.
By hitting that reset button, the father is effectively communicating a devastating psychological message. He is saying, you cannot handle your own independence. You cannot fight your own battles.
Wow.
You tried to build your own game, you made your own rules, and it led to a terrifying monster. So I am terminating your game. Come back under my control where it's safe. It is the infantilization of the adult mind.
It's incredibly manipulative because it is wrapped in the guise of protection. It feels like love, it feels like safety, but it operates exactly like a cage.
Exactly.
So how does the dreamer react to being put back in the cage? Do they accept the safety? Actually, no. The dreamer looks at the father, refuses to restart the game, says, "I'm done," and immediately escapes the area on a bicycle.
That initial refusal is a very healthy impulse. It shows that the dreamer's ego still has some fight left.
They don't want to be controlled.
They recognize on some level that accepting the reset means accepting permanent subjugation to the father's rules. However, the method they choose to execute this refusal is deeply problematic.
You mean the bicycle? I was wondering about that. It's a dream. They could have teleported. They could have flown away. Why a bicycle?
Because the bicycle represents a temporary regressive avoidance tactic. Think about what a bicycle is.
Okay.
It requires intense manual effort, it leaves you completely physically exposed to the elements, and most importantly, it is a vehicle heavily associated with childhood and early adolescence.
So they are rejecting the father's control, which is the correct move, but they are fleeing the conflict entirely rather than standing their ground and resolving it. They are regressing to an adolescent mode of escape.
Yes. It feels exactly like moving back into your childhood bedroom after a really catastrophic breakup or after getting fired from a job that was supposed to be your big break.
You retreat to a physical space that feels safe, familiar, and inherently adolescent. You reject the harsh, unforgiving realities of the adult world.
But aren't you really just hitting pause on your actual life?
Exactly. You haven't solved the emotional devastation of the breakup, and you haven't figured out your career. You just run away and hidden under a quilt. You are pedaling away on a metaphorical bicycle.
And the clinical literature takes that a step further. It is not just hitting pause, it is actively allowing the rot to spread.
Because they fled.
Because the dreamer fled on the bicycle instead of integrating the shadow figure, instead of actually confronting the unhealed wound on the solar plexus, the unresolved psychological tension does not just vanish into the ether. It attaches itself to the dreamer.
So it follows them.
When you flee from a psychological conflict, it simply morphs, changing its shape to blend into whatever new landscape you run to.
And the landscape in the dream immediately shifts to reflect that unresolved tension. The dreamer is pedaling this bike away from the father's office, and they enter a sunken train tunnel.
A very specific setting.
Yeah, and immediately the anxiety starts multiplying. The one junior from the boss fight suddenly multiplies into two juniors riding alongside the dreamer. And up ahead in the tunnel, illuminated in the gloom, is a completely new figure.
Who is it?
A high schooler wearing a blindingly bright red jersey. This teen in the red jersey is riding a large adult bike, but they're tightly hugging a tiny, fragile toddler.
We need to pause and examine the architecture of the tunnel itself before we look at the figures inside it. A sunken train tunnel is the ultimate representation of liminality.
Liminality is one of those terms that gets thrown around in academic papers a lot. Break down what a liminal space actually signifies for the human brain.
Anthropologically and psychologically, a liminal space is a threshold. It comes from the Latin word limen, meaning doorway.
Okay.
It is the ambiguous space between what was and what is next. A tunnel is not a destination. It is the dark, often unnerving passage connecting two stable environments.
So psychologically, it represents a transitional phase in life where the old rules, like the rules of the father's office, no longer apply, but the new rules of true adulthood haven't been established yet.
Exactly. It is an area of intense vulnerability, disorientation, and deeply blurred boundaries.
And it's within this blurred boundary space that the dreamer's trauma completely hijacks their perception. The dreamer looks at this teen in the red jersey holding the toddler, and without any evidence, immediately jumps to the absolute darkest, most horrifying conclusion possible.
The worst case scenario.
The dreamer suspects the teen is sexually abusing the child. They feel this massive wave of intense, overwhelming alarm, but as they get closer and the lighting changes, they realize it's actually a completely innocent scene.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's just an older teenager taking really tender, protective care of a young relative.
The question we have to ask clinically is, why did the dreamer's mind immediately default to assuming the most horrific, violating act imaginable?
Because their entire nervous system is operating on hypervigilance, right? They're projecting their own internal chaos onto the external world.
Precisely that. The dreamer has just been attacked by masked thieves. They were nearly annihilated by a monster formed from their own repressed trauma, and their father just profoundly violated their autonomy by hitting the reset button.
They're a mess.
Their psyche is battered and on an extremely high alert for boundary violations. When they see a vulnerable child, which in dream logic almost always represents their own fragile, vulnerable inner self, they immediately assume it is being preyed upon by a larger, older figure.
So the trauma has created a cognitive filter that turns every ambiguous interaction into a catastrophic threat.
It's exactly like wearing glasses where the lenses are made of panic. Everything you look at is distorted into a worst-case scenario.
So the dreamer gets closer, realizes they were entirely wrong, and feels this massive physical wave of relief. The threat isn't real, but their reaction to that relief is, well, it's bizarre.
This is where it gets strange.
To break the lingering tension, the dreamer loudly and intentionally farts, hoping to provide some comic relief to the juniors they are riding with.
It sounds utterly absurd when you say it out loud, but from a psychoanalytic perspective, this is a profound moment of attempted catharsis that goes horribly wrong.
I am going to need you to walk me through the profound psychoanalytic depths of flatulence. Because on the surface, it just sounds like a crass joke in a weird dream.
Think about the physiological state of the dreamer. They have been enduring immense, crushing pressure.
From everywhere.
The pressure of the unstable game, the pressure of the invasion, the pressure of the lion, the pressure of the father's control, and the acute, spiking terror of the suspected abuse.
The body and the mind are wound as tight as a drum.
A bodily function like a fart represents a desperate, involuntary, infantile attempt to release pent-up psychological and physiological tension. The dreamer is trying to depressurize their system.
And they are trying to do it under the socially acceptable guise of self-deprecating humor. They're trying to connect with the others through a shared base physical reality.
But the connection totally fails. It backfires spectacularly. The teen in the red jersey is deeply disgusted by it and starts harshly scolding the dreamer, yelling, "Have some decency! Look at the situation we are in!"
And that scolding is devastating to the dreamer's ego. It confirms the exact fear that forced them to construct the handsome blonde persona in the first place, doesn't it?
The deep-seated terror that their true, raw, unpolished self, their bodily reality, their messy feelings, their clumsy attempts at connection, is fundamentally disgusting and socially unacceptable.
The one moment they let their guard down and release the pressure, the world responds with harsh, judgmental disgust.
It is the ultimate social nightmare.
It's like being at a very formal, very tense dinner party. The silence is deafening, you're crawling out of your skin with anxiety, so you decide to break the ice with a really dark, inappropriate joke.
Hoping it'll relieve the pressure.
Right. In your head, you think you're acting as the pressure valve for the room. You think people will laugh and the tension will break. But instead, the joke lands flat.
Oh, that's the worst.
The room goes completely uncomfortably dead silent. Everyone just stares at you with absolute disdain. You tried to force a moment of raw connection, but you just managed to make yourself the absolute outcast of the group.
That is a phenomenal parallel. You attempted a raw emotional release and you collided headfirst into the rigid, unforgiving walls of social expectation.
Yeah.
And notice how the dream environment reacts to this failure of connection. The rejection is so painful that the figures around the dreamer begin to mutate.
Right. The face of the teen in the red jersey suddenly morphs into the face of a middle school rival. And one of the juniors, riding alongside the dreamer, morphs into a famously strong, intimidating clubmate from high school.
And suddenly everyone in the tunnel is wearing a bright red jersey.
The red jerseys are spreading like a virus. The dreamer is suddenly completely surrounded by intimidating rivals from their past, all draped in this aggressive, blinding red.
Color symbolism in dreams is heavily documented, and it is rarely accidental. In this context, the color red symbolizes escalating, unchecked emotional volatility.
What does that mean exactly?
It is the color of alarm systems, of intense passion, of deep, boiling anger, and of a desperate, burning need for social validation. Crucially, in a competitive setting, it is the color of jealousy and threat.
The fact that the dreamer is surrounded by physically strong rivals radiating red signifies that the dreamer's internal emotional state is reaching a critical fever pitch.
Yes, their feelings of inadequacy, their fear of judgment, and their shame over the failed joke are literally multiplying and boxing them in.
The physical release, the fart failed. The emotional release failed. They are trapped in a liminal tunnel surrounded by hostile rivals radiating aggressive energy.
And when an organism is surrounded, when its basic social and physical defenses fail, the mind has to deploy something much stronger to survive the encounter.
Which brings us to the deployment of the heavy artillery of the subconscious.
We are entering the realm of advanced psychological armor. When the ego is this threatened, it stops trying to connect and starts trying to dominate and detach.
The strong clubmate in the red jersey turns to the dreamer and starts speaking in these incredibly confusing, escalating riddles.
Like what?
He says, masters don't complain to masters. Masters don't complain to masters. It just goes on like this. It's a nonsensical logic puzzle designed to confuse and assert dominance.
This is a textbook, crystal clear manifestation of a defense mechanism known as intellectualization.
Let's break down the mechanics of intellectualization. How does the brain actually execute this in real time, especially when it's under threat?
Intellectualization is a highly sophisticated defense mechanism where the brain encounters a severe emotional, physical, or psychological threat and immediately strips all the emotion away by turning the threat into an abstract, logical puzzle.
So you stop feeling and start thinking.
Exactly. It is an extreme reliance on the left hemisphere of the brain, the logical, analytical side, to completely suppress the right hemisphere, the emotional, intuitive side. It allows the individual to use their intellect as an impenetrable shield.
Because the dreamer is feeling deeply emotionally threatened and humiliated by the social rejection. But instead of sitting with the agonizing feelings of shame or fear, the dream constructs a verbal, logical battlefield.
And the dreamer leans into this battlefield hard. They don't run away this time.
They use intense, laser-focused logic to shoot the rival down. The dreamer snaps back, look, if you complain, you're not a master in the first place, so your entire premise is logically flawed.
Yeah.
And the rival is completely stunned. He has no counter-argument, and he concedes the point. The dreamer cleanly wins the argument.
By winning the intellectual debate, the dreamer instantly regains a sense of superiority and control without ever having to risk a single ounce of emotional vulnerability.
They outsmarted the pain.
They don't have to address the stinging shame of the rejection. They just have to prove they are smarter than the person who rejected them. It is an incredibly common, often debilitating defense mechanism for highly intelligent, analytical people.
So they just argue instead of cry.
Right. When they are hurt, they do not cry. They do not express anger. They coldly argue the semantics of why the other person is logically incorrect. They turn a bleeding wound into a debate topic.
I feel like half our listeners, including myself, feel personally attacked right now. But it's true. We do that all the time. We turn our trauma into a TED Talk so we don't actually have to feel it.
Exactly.
But the dream doesn't stop with just winning the argument. After defeating the rival with logic, the dreamer looks down at the precious toddler the rival was holding.
The same child the dreamer was fiercely trying to protect from abuse just moments ago.
Right. But when they look down, the child has vanished. In its place, the rival is holding a plastic supermarket bag containing 3 cheap, instant cup yakisoba cup noodles.
This transformation is perhaps the most shocking, revealing, and ultimately tragic twist in the entire clinical text. What we are witnessing here is a massive structural deployment of devaluation.
Okay, we went from a living, breathing, vulnerable baby to a plastic bag of instant noodles. I need you to walk me through the cognitive dissonance required for the brain to pull off this specific magic trick.
First, we have to reiterate what the baby represents. In nearly all schools of dream analysis, a baby or a toddler represents the inner child.
Okay.
It is the pure, vulnerable, developing life energy of the dreamer. It is their raw creativity, their core innocence, and their most sensitive, authentic self. It is the most valuable thing they possess.
And earlier in the tunnel, the dreamer was literally terrified that this baby was being harmed. They were hypervigilant, fiercely protective of it.
Yes, they recognized its immense value and fragility. But look at what happened next. The environment became overwhelmingly hostile.
The red jerseys multiplied, the harsh social rejection occurred.
Right, the rivals closed in, and the intellectual battle ensued. The dreamer's psyche performs a rapid calculation and realizes it cannot adequately protect this incredibly precious, vulnerable inner child in such a dangerous, unpredictable environment.
It's too much of a risk.
The fear of that baby being hurt, judged, or destroyed by the rivals is simply too agonizing for the conscious mind to bear.
So to eliminate the fear of the precious thing being destroyed, the brain just decides the thing isn't precious anymore.
Exactly. It is a radical cognitive restructuring. The mind devalues the object itself to protect the ego from the pain of its potential loss.
Wow.
It transforms the irreplaceable, infinitely valuable baby into cheap, mass-produced, totally replaceable instant noodles. If it's a baby, it is a world-ending tragedy if it is dropped or crushed.
But if it's just a crinkly plastic bag of cup noodles,
Oh.
who cares? It doesn't matter. It has a shelf life of 3 years and costs 99 cents.
By deciding that the most vulnerable, authentic part of yourself has absolutely no value, you create an impenetrable psychological armor. You protect yourself from the pain of others harming it.
That is just, I mean, it's breathtakingly sad, but also brilliantly protective. And it hits so incredibly close to home. Think about how often we execute this exact cup noodle trick in our waking lives.
Oh, all the time.
You have a passion project that you love deeply. It could be a script you're writing, a small business you want to start, a painting you've spent months on. It is your baby. It holds your soul.
But you are terrified of putting it out there.
Absolutely paralyzed by the fear of putting it out into the world and having people mock it, reject it, or ignore it. So what do? You devalue it before anyone else gets the chance.
You show it to a friend and say, oh, it's just this stupid little side hustle I mess around with on weekends.
It's just a dumb hobby. I don't really care if it goes anywhere. You turn your precious baby into cheap cup noodles so that when someone inevitably critiques it, you can shrug and pretend it doesn't hurt. You beat them to the punch.
That is the exact mechanism. You strip the meaning away to shield yourself from the intense vulnerability of caring. But the long-term neurological and psychological tragedy of devaluation is that it works too well.
The brain believes the stories you tell it.
It really does. If you spend your entire adult life treating your passions, your creativity, and your inner vulnerability like cheap, replaceable cup noodles, you eventually rewire your brain to believe it.
You lose touch entirely with your own intrinsic value.
You become safe from criticism, but you also become entirely hollow.
The intellectual riddle and the cup noodles. They are brilliant defensive maneuvers that got the dreamer through the hostile tunnel. But they're just Band-Aids,
They haven't actually healed the solar plexus wound.
and they haven't solved the problem of the controlling father. The dreamers survived the liminal space, but survival isn't growth. Which leads us finally out of the dark tunnel and into the light of the final act.
The dream's finale abandons the high-octane anxiety of the earlier phases and settles into a much quieter, profoundly melancholic setting. This is where the true, difficult work of psychological resolution begins to take shape.
The dreamer rises out of the tunnel and the dream ends in a vacant, weed-filled lot. It's described as an area under development, located right next to the strong classmate's house.
And who is standing in this vacant lot?
The dreamer's father. That he looks completely different. He doesn't look like the authoritative, patriarchal man from the imposing office.
He doesn't look like the confident guy who effortlessly hit the reset button to banish the lion.
No. He looks slightly younger, but notably rounder. His posture is entirely different. He's docile, he is subservient, and he is down on his hands and knees doing manual labor, weeding the classmate's garden in this vacant lot.
The physical environment is incredibly telling. A vacant lot under development, overrun with weeds, this represents the dreamer's newly developing self.
It is no longer the established, rigid, inherited structure of the father's corporate office.
It is raw new ground, but it is filled with weeds, which represent mundane daily stresses, lingering old habits, and minor anxieties that require constant, tedious maintenance to clear away so that new growth can actually happen.
But the crucial detail is that the dreamer isn't the one doing the weeding. The father is doing it, and he's doing it for the classmate, the rival.
And then it gets even more humiliating for the father.
The classmate walks out of the house, looks down at the father, and rudely scolds him. A teenager is yelling at this adult man, saying, "I told you to do it, why isn't it done yet?"
And we have to examine the dreamer's internal emotional response to witnessing this scene. How do they react to seeing the previously omnipotent father treated with such profound disrespect?
They don't feel triumph. They don't feel vindicated. They feel this profound, aching, heavy sadness. They note how pitiful and physically diminished the father seems.
And the text points out that the dreamer actually wakes up from the dream, specifically analyzing and sitting with this exact lingering feeling of sorrow.
What the dreamer is experiencing in that moment of waking sorrow is a fundamental psychological milestone, isn't it?
Yes. In psychoanalytic terms, this is known as demythologization. It marks the successful resolution of the Oedipal conflict.
Demythologization.
Mm.
Breaking down the myth. Explain how that operates in the context of our relationship with our parents.
When we are young children, our parents are literal gods to us. They are omnipotent, all-knowing figures. They physically control our reality, our safety, our access to food and love.
Like the beginning of the dream.
Exactly. In the very first phase of this dream, the father was exactly that mythological figure. He owned the imposing office. His authority dictated the literal physics and rules of the video game. And when things went catastrophically wrong with the lion, he possessed the godlike, reality-altering power to just hit a reset button and make the danger vanish.
He was a deity of absolute power and control.
And as we move into adolescence and early adulthood, that omnipotent figure usually transitions into the monster we have to rebel against, right?
Like the terrifying lion with the flaming blades. The parent becomes the tyrant who is blocking our independence. We fight them because we still believe they hold all the power.
Exactly. The parent is either a god to be worshipped for safety or a tyrant to be violently feared and rebelled against. But Carl Jung posited that true adulthood, a process he called individuation, cannot possibly occur as long as you view your parents through that polarized mythological lens.
You cannot be an autonomous adult if you still believe there are gods or monsters controlling your life.
So seeing the father out in the sun, down on his hands and knees in the dirt, being scolded by a snotty teenager, it ruthlessly strips away the myth.
The dreamer is finally, painfully seeing the father not as a protective god, not as a terrifying tyrant, but as just a guy.
An ordinary, aging, flawed, highly vulnerable human being. The man who gets tired, who makes mistakes, who can be humiliated by a teenager, who has his own unhealed wounds.
It is exactly like the climax of The Wizard of Oz. You spend your whole journey terrified of this booming, omnipotent deity of fire and smoke.
And then Toto pulls back the curtain.
And it's just, well, a guy. An old man frantically pulling levers, trying to keep the illusion going. It is incredibly disillusioning.
Disillusioning is the most accurate word you could use. It is the literal loss of an illusion. And the natural emotional response to the loss of a deeply held, comforting illusion is profound sorrow.
The pity and the sadness the dreamer feels upon waking is the grief of letting go of the childhood fantasy.
It is the grief of realizing that there is no all-powerful adult out there who can magically protect you from the world.
That right there, that is the sorrow of growing up. It is a universal, unavoidable ache.
Hmm.
You hit an age where you realize your parents are just people who are winging it, just like you are.
They don't have all the answers.
And while that realization means you are finally free from their absolute authority, they can't hit the reset button on your life anymore, it also carries a terrifying weight.
Because it means you are suddenly entirely responsible for yourself.
There is no one left in the warehouse to come fix the game for you. You have to clear your own weeds out of your own vacant lot.
That realization is incredibly heavy. It is deeply sad, but it is the absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for true psychological independence. You cannot build your own life. You cannot design your own game until you accept that the gods of your childhood are just flawed humans.
So we have to pull all of this together. We've traveled through a structurally unstable corporate bouncy castle game.
We survived a flaming lion boss fight that was triggered by a repressed stomach wound.
We rejected a false manipulative parental rescue, pedaled through a liminal train tunnel filled with intellectual riddles and devalued cup noodles, and ended up standing in a weed-filled lot, processing the grief of our parents' humanity.
That is a wild, exhausting, profoundly deep ride.
It is a complete psychological odyssey compressed into a single REM cycle. If we synthesize the clinical conclusions drawn from the entirety of this source material, what is the ultimate prescription for the dreamer?
And by extension, for anyone listening who recognizes themselves in these patterns, it is about moving aggressively past defensive avoidance.
Right. It means you have to actively stop relying on intellectualization. You have to stop turning every emotional hurt into a debate just to prove you are smarter than your pain.
And you absolutely have to stop using devaluation. You cannot keep turning your passions, your inner child, your vulnerability into cheap cup noodles just to avoid the risk of someone criticizing them.
Because relying on those defenses, the logic puzzles and the devaluation, will keep you permanently stuck in the liminal tunnel. You will survive, but you will never grow.
True growth, true Jungian individuation requires doing the grueling, terrifying shadow work. It requires turning the bike around, going back to the stairs, and facing that junior.
You have to look at the unhealed Sugetsu wound, the trauma you've taped over and pretended to forget. You have to take the tape off the check engine light and actually look at the broken engine.
You have to accept your vulnerabilities instead of hiding them behind a handsome blonde persona.
And most crucially of all, you have to rewrite your own rules, build your own foundation, without waiting for a parental figure, a boss, a partner, or any external authority to emerge from the warehouse and hit the reset button when things get scary.
For everyone listening to us right now, whether you are driving or working out or just sitting at home taking notes on your own life, I want you to remember this core truth. Building your own game, constructing a life that is authentically, undeniably yours, is inherently going to involve some tumbling.
It is going to involve falling down. The wobbly foundation at the very beginning of the dream wasn't a design flaw. It was a feature of true independence.
Losing your balance isn't a sign that you are failing at life. It is simply proof that you are finally the one standing at the controls.
It is the absolute cost of admission to your own autonomous life. You will inevitably encounter thieves. Your shiny social mask will inevitably fail you in a crisis, and you will have to face the terrifying monsters of your own shadow.
But walking through that fire is the only path out of the Father's office.
I want to leave you with one final thought, something to really chew on as you go about the rest of your day. We started this deep dive talking about how desperately we all want clear, binary medical diagnoses.
Broken or not broken?
We want a doctor to point at an X-ray and tell us exactly, step by step, how to fix the problem. We want the authority figure to make it clean, simple, and safe.
But life isn't like that.
No, it's not. Think about the architecture of your own life right now. Are you currently playing a game where, deep down, you are secretly hoping someone else will come down from the warehouse and press the reset button for you?
Are you waiting for a savior to unplug the console so you don't have to face the lion?
And if they did, if someone offered to take the controller away to assume all the responsibility and make everything perfectly safe and controlled again, would you be brave enough to get on your bike and ride away into the dark?